So lately I've been replaying Sonic Frontiers on a New Game Plus file, and the more that I've played the game, the more I really started thinking about one of the core aspects of this game, that being the combat. Originally when the game came out, I used to find the combat to be one of my favorite aspects of this game, with how much spectacle there was for each fight and how cool it was just to chain all these moves together. But the more fights that I engaged in on my new playthrough, the more dull the experience was as I realized how mundane and bare bones the combat actually is in this game. Even the Titan bosses don't hit as much anymore, although the music still slaps, let's be real. But after a while of fighting these enemies and not really getting as much satisfaction as I used to, I really did start to think about how Sonic Team should be handling combat if they were to implement it for their next open zone title. And as you can see from this video's existence, I have quite a bit to say on it. So strap in as I start rambling about how our favorite blue rodent should be throwing hands for the next Sonic game. Or any future Sonic game, it doesn't really have to be the next one. But before I get into this topic, I just want to quickly mention that I am not, in any way, shape, or form, a game developer. The closest I've actually really gotten to that is making Fortnite maps within UEFN, which you should totally check out because I think they're pretty good, in my personal opinion, and I said so. But yeah, this is really just me speaking about my personal preference for combat in my video games, so if you have any differing opinions, please be sure to let me know in the comments below. I really would appreciate it, and with that out of the way, let's jump straight into the video. Before going into depth what type of combat would fit Sonic, first we have to actually look at the combat system already made in Sonic Frontiers, and see why it isn't really that good. The way you attack in this game is simple. First you start off with your homing attack, then if you keep pressing that same button you have a simple punch and kick combo. Your other forms of attacks come in special button inputs that you can input to perform two different types of moves. One type is letting you hit the enemy once with a lot of damage, and the other type is hitting the enemy multiple times with not as much damage, but it stacks up over time. And yeah, that's kind of it, really. I wish I was joking. No, that's really it when it comes to the combat. There isn't really much going on with it, which leaves multiple playthroughs of the game making the combat feel very repetitive over time. I will give it this though, having it be this beginner friendly is pretty good, but outside of that there really isn't much mileage you can get out of it, and most people just end up spamming the stomp attack anyways, which is the quickest attack and deals a lot of damage. Speaking of the attack moves, let's talk about them real quickly. The way that you unlock attacks in this game is from a skill tree. This skill tree consists of 11 unlockable attacks, 3 of which being relegated to saving your friends through the story, a damage multiplier that applies after filling up your meter, an air trick that lets you get more XP, and the auto combo option. An option in the skill tree. Why is that in a skill tree? With how small of a skill tree there is, you can start seeing some of the overlaps with the moves that you unlock in the game. For example, one of the moves you unlock in the story, the Cyclone Kick, makes Sonic spin around the enemy dealing bits of damage over time. While this is a cool move, there is another move in the skill tree that is nearly identical in how it works, which is called the Spin Slash. Performing this makes Sonic spin around the enemy, dealing bits of damage over time. But this time he's in a ball, whoa! Alright, the skill tree is lacking and the skills themselves aren't anything to write home about, and they also locked the auto combo behind a skill tree. What else is there to mention about the combat in this game? I think it's best that we move on before I make this video a feature-length film. Despite all my ramblings about the weird choices in this game, the combat is still pretty serviceable. It gets the job done. I just really wish there was more to it. I know this game isn't really meant to be played like your average hack and slash game, but from what we have currently, it's just very bare bones. Now that I've explained why this form of combat isn't really that good, I would like to move things over to a different Sonic game that handles combat in a more traditional way, for better and for worse. For those that are unaware, Sonic Unleashed is my personal favorite Sonic game of all time, which I know is a common take nowadays, but it really isn't for the reasons that you might think it is. Sure, the daytime stages are a blast to play through, but I found myself more fond of the level design seen in Sonic Generations than, hell, even Shadow Generations now that we've actually gotten to play that for at least a month now. But the daytime stages are obviously not the main focus of this video. Instead, we'll be going over the other side of the game, the Werehog. Contrary to popular belief, I love the Werehog. Dare I say that it's better than the boost stages, and I will die on this hill to defend this opinion. Even if you say that I'm wrong, I am not. Sorry, I just had to throw that one out there. While the daytime stages are something we're more familiar with our Sonic games, the night stages go on an entirely different approach with the hack and slash style of gameplay, seen in games like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry.
I feel like a fucking celebrity in this town.
Where your main goal is to beat up a lot of enemies as quickly and stylishly as possible. It even uses the more traditional control schemes with 2 attack buttons that can be used to create combos based on what order you press them. The amount of combos you can do in this game is a lot more compared to Frontiers. It would probably make Sonic Frontiers cry like an anime fan on prom night. Why did I clue that? Alright, so cringy trailer line aside, let's just go over how the fighting actually works in this game. Your form of attacks come from 2 separate buttons that allow you to do 2 different types of attacks. Straight attacks and hook attacks. Sticking with the straight attacks will focus primarily on enemies that are in front of you, while hook attacks will focus on everyone around you, but with less range than the straight attacks. Combining these 2 attack types for specific inputs will result in different types of attacks coming out, ranging from a quick and heavy attack, or multiple attacks that can hit multiple enemies at one time. Some of these moves also have special properties. For example, when an enemy is trying to guard, most of your attacks won't actually go through, so you have to perform a specific type of attack to actually take their guard out, so then you can actually hit them. You can also chain together one type of attack with your jump button to send your enemies in the air to either continue your combo in the skies, or what I like to personally do, give them that pile drive action, yeah baby! Oh, and speaking of the aerial attacks, now would be a good time to talk about some cool quirks you can do with some of these attacks. And by quirks, I mean cool platforming tricks you can actually do with them. Yes, that's correct. Some of these moves are actually pretty useful outside of battle, and can be used in certain areas for the platforming sections to speed things up just a little bit. For example, one of the aerial moves that you can do propels you forward after performing it, which can be very helpful if your double jump doesn't cover enough distance. You can also use this after an uppercut to give you both extra height and extra distance too. This is actually used to skip whole sections of a level, most prominently in Empire City's night stage with these fences that are just low enough to make you bypass them with the uppercut. There's also the spinning needle attack, which can be helpful to keep your running speed in the air. This is especially useful in Cool Edge's night stage where you have to jump downwards on these ice pillars to continue forward. At this point, I hope that I've made it clear how much more depth there is to Sonic Unleashed's combat system compared to the one seen in Sonic Frontiers. Not only do you have a lot more moves to work with, but you can also use these moves in different scenarios, even outside of fighting enemies too. However, despite all the praise that I'm giving Sonic Unleashed's combat system, it is still far from perfect. And while I'm not going to go into the flaws with this system, like I did with Sonic Frontiers earlier in this video, there is one very crucial aspect to this combat system that is the very reason as to why this whole game is divided by the Sonic community. It just doesn't fit Sonic. While Sonic Unleashed uses a combat system similar with other hack and slash games, it's very apparent that just throwing something like this in a Sonic game just doesn't work with everyone. There's a reason why Sonic has to go through a completely different form, so that his speed doesn't contrast with the more precise hack and slash elements of the game. As much as I love the Werehog's combat and how it got me into more hack and slash games, this style of gameplay just isn't for everyone, and Sonic games for whatever reason always try to please everyone at once. For better and for worse. So if the combat system in Sonic Frontiers is too bare bones with little variety, and the one in Unleashed has lots of depth but doesn't fit Sonic's gameplay style, what direction is there for combat? Well, there's always the chance that we just go back to a more traditional format for Sonic games where we just ditch the combat system altogether and just stick with platforming only, which is shown to work really well in the open zone featured in Shadow Generations, but seeing how successful Sonic Frontiers was with the general public, especially in Japan, there's always a chance that they keep the combat system and just expand upon it for a future release, which really isn't a bad thing actually. Alright, so let's just pretend for the next open zone style Sonic game that they keep the combat system already made in Frontiers and just expand upon it. What exactly should they do to improve it and make the combat more fun? Well, first off, I think we should just ditch the cinematic camera angles altogether. While they are pretty cool, having them play over and over can get stale and could possibly lead to motion sickness for some people if it's done too quickly. Sonic Team did add this as an option for one of the 3 content drops of 2023, and based on what I've seen, it does seem like people do prefer having that turned off, even if some of the moves do look silly without it. Another thing I feel like should be improved upon are the variety of attacks you can perform. Like I mentioned earlier, there's only really 2 types of attacks in Sonic Frontiers, where you either hit the enemy once and deal a lot of damage, or hit the enemy multiple times with the damage building up over time. Only having these 2 types of attacks leaves the combat feeling very stale the more you use it. So let's try to add some more attacks to Sonic's moveset. For starters, how about we have a move that lets you launch enemies up into the air to lead into some aerial combos. Hell, how about we have some actual aerial attacks instead of Sonic just doing the same moves he can normally do? Maybe we could have some attacks hit multiple enemies at once, like a modified Cyclone Kick that has more of an area of effect to hit multiple enemies at once, or the Sonic Boom Kicks going after different targets after every kick. Also, speaking of the skills, if we're going to have another skill tree, I feel like there should be more unlockable moves to actually warrant having a skill tree. If the next game has a similar amount of moves compared to Frontiers, maybe we should just ditch the concept of a skill tree and just have them being unlockable like a level up system with the XP worm. Also, speaking of XP, maybe don't make it so that the XP drops from enemies are tiny and have the barrels around the open world contain 2 levels worth of XP in them. It just feels really inconsistent and doesn't enforce you to actually fight enemies to level up Sonic. One last thing I would like to suggest are how these attacks are actually performed. In Sonic Frontiers, most of the attacks take more priority over other actions like jumping and homing attacking. With certain moves like the Cross Slash, which is performed by air boosting and pressing the jump button, sometimes it can lead to situations where you're just trying to jump after a boost, but since there's an enemy nearby, you just perform the Cross Slash and completely mess up your trajectory. Situations like these are more common than they should be, and really shouldn't be an issue for a platformer. Hopefully with a rework to the input system, this won't become an issue anymore. And those are just about all the tweaks I can think of. Although I do feel like I'm forgetting something very crucial that I wanted to suggest. It was probably nothing. Anyways, that's all I really wanted to talk about with Sonic combat systems and how they should be implemented for a future game. If there's something that I got wrong or you disagree with my potential approach, then feel free to bring them up in the comments. Hopefully you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please press the like and subscribe button as I'm really trying to get back into YouTube. I would really appreciate if you did help out with the channel and stuff. And with that, I think it's time to end the video. My name is Starwise and you have yourself a good morning, afternoon, evening, or good night. Take care.